The following Stateline History Special is made possible by the Oklahoma Centennial Commission. Celebrate Oklahoma, a unique history, an extraordinary future.
The earliest civilizations in the world have been along rivers like the Nile and the Euphrates.
From the 9th to the 16th centuries, eastern Oklahoma was thriving. Archaeologists call it the Mississippian culture. It was a huge trading, religious, and political system, and like other early civilizations, it was based on a river.
The rivers have played a very important part in the history of this area because that, of course, was the primary means of transportation.
The river, which came to be known as the Arkansas, brought white explorers to the area. Later, it brought the fur trade and tourism and migration, which, due to the vagaries of rivers in Oklahoma, was adventurous.
You might be bound for Fort Gibson or headed from Fort Gibson to New Orleans or other points beyond and find yourself on a sandbar, and you might be on that sandbar for a long time.
Almost 100 years later, technology helped the Army Corps of Engineers help the river reclaim its place in Oklahoma history. A series of locks and dams ensure navigable water all the way to New Orleans, meaning goods from Oklahoma can be shipped by water to any seaport in the world. On this edition of Stateline, what do you know? You can get there from here.
Well, you can well understand that on such an occasion like this, it's a pleasure for me to be here on the Oklahoma seacoast, on the Oklahoma seacoast, on the Oklahoma seacoast.
The City of Tulsa Rogers County Port Authority will purchase 1,750 acres of this land using money approved by Tulsans in this month's bond election.
The Arkansas River was shallow in some places, very deep in other places. So you were limited in how far goods could be transported. When steam power became into use in the 1820s, the steamboats on the river couldn't have regular schedules because it depended on what the river was like.
So when the railroads established Oklahoma as part of their operation with a bridge over the Verdigris River and the Katy Railroad making inroads into Oklahoma, basically navigation came to an end because it was just not reliable enough to compete with the railroads.
By 1871, 1880, you didn't find any more significant river traffic on the Arkansas.
This is the Arkansas River. It was the superhighway of an ancient culture, but the demands of a new era rendered this mode of transportation obsolete. River traffic was gone, but it wasn't forgotten. 70 years after the steamboats left Oklahoma, a state politician began planning what you might call a river revival.
In 1943, when there were some significant floods in the area. At that time, the governor was Robert S. Kerr, and he took a a flight. It was taken up in a plane to survey the damage. And at that time, Kerr felt that one of his major goals was to see if something could be done about the flooding.
Governor Kerr had enough experience to know that to get federal money for his regional problem, he'd have to make his request about more than flooding.
So they put together a package of things to do that were significant for the area. And flood control was one of them. Another one was hydroelectric power, because that was one of the goals after or during the Depression, was to bring electric power, cheap electric power, to rural areas. Another was irrigation. Of course, the Oklahoma had become famous for the Dust Bowl, even though not the entire state was affected by it, but because of publicity, that was a very significant part now of Oklahoma's history. So irrigation was another factor. And then the idea of recreation, having recreational lakes, as well as navigation. So all of these things were bundled together as the benefits of making the Arkansas River navigable. And this authorization was passed in Congress with a lot of other authorizations for a lot of other national projects.
The Rivers and Harbors Act of 1946 was not fully funded. Money for massive construction on the Arkansas River would have to be approved 1 year at a time.
It took many, many years of very hard work by our members of Congress to get that funding. And it was not only their effort, it was also a local effort. There were people in Oklahoma some people who just, they weren't sure, they didn't know if this was the right direction to go, if navigation was that beneficial, but it became evident that if the project were going to succeed, it was going to take not only the effort of members of Congress who were from Arkansas, Oklahoma, and actually even from Kansas and Colorado to back it, but they also needed solid local backing.
Men are saying this.
In 1948, Governor Kerr made a successful bid for the U.S. Senate. He became a formidable figure on Capitol Hill, earning the nickname King of the Senate. He would have to bring his powerful influence to bear to force funding for the river.
When Eisenhower was Supreme Commander in Europe, as he was during the Second World War, during the period of the war and after the Americans entered Germany, he became very impressed with the German Autobahn and the highway system. And when he became president, he wanted to have a superhighway system in the United States, something that could easily link various parts of the country, which eventually became the interstate highway system which we have today. Well, in the 50s, this is one of his goals, and it said that Robert Kerr had a talk with Eisenhower and said, you know, I would really be pleased to back your interstate highway system if you would stand behind the navigation system for the Arkansas River. And it said that this is one of the means that Kerr used to secure funding.
While he approved the system, Eisenhower was still reluctant to support funding. So another Oklahoma congressman, Page Belcher of Tulsa, did some pushing of his own. Over breakfast with the president, Belcher stated that he might lose his seat to a Democrat if the river project fell through. Eisenhower released the money and it was full steam ahead. But engineers ran into a major problem with the river, one that would take a real Einstein to solve.
There was a study that was done that said, how are you going to make this river navigable? It's just going to silt up. So they hired some experts, including the son of Albert Einstein, who was a sedimentologist. His name was Hans Albert Einstein. And he was one of the people that came back after the study was done and said, look, what you need to do is you need to actually straighten the channel. The Arkansas River and Verdigris were very winding rivers. And if you straighten the channel, that'll increase the rate of flow of the water, and the silt will tend to settle on the banks rather than in the channel, because of the rate of water flow. The central channel will be mostly kept clear or clearer. And so that's what was done.
To this day, you can see Einstein's idea all along the banks of the river. The built-up dams keep the water in the river from getting sidetracked. The Arkansas River navigation system is massive. In taking it on, the Army Corps of Engineers faced its biggest civil projects challenge since the Panama Canal. 3 lake dam projects, Oologah, Keystone, and Eufaula, support the system, which stretches 445 miles from the Mississippi to the head of the system at the port of Catoosa near Tulsa. It has to maintain a depth of 9 feet. There are 18 locks and dams. Construction of those locks and dams took place throughout the 60s, and Oklahomans who lived along the river were in store for a major change.
I'm fortunate in the fact that I'm old enough to remember what the Arkansas River was like before this navigation system was ever built. I used to fish with my grandfather when I was 6 or 7 years old, and at that time, in the summertime, when the weather got hot and the river levels dropped, the river wasn't much wider than the approach to the lock chamber you're looking at here now. And if the fishing wasn't good on one side of the river, he'd put me on his shoulders and we'd just wade to the other side of the river and fish.
Okay, Mark, if you would, please check for me.
Greg Barnes, who would one day manage the entire system in Oklahoma, watched the lock and dam near Sallisaw being built.
I was a child, so it was just, to me it was probably like watching a pyramid being built or something, but you know, I remember my grandfather telling me he realized the importance of the system at that time, which I didn't, but I can remember him telling me that you know, one of these days you'll see more out here than just sandbars and pools of water. You'll actually see ships going up and down this.
Another area youngster would also wind up working the river.
I was there within approximately 10 to 15 miles each one of them, and we never paid them any attention. I heard about them, but didn't know what they were. I'd seen dams on TV, and so I thought, okay, I didn't know that they were building one like this close.
And even the historian who grew up in Tulsa remembers what life was like before the system.
When I was a kid, it seemed like every year we were sandbagging along Brookside in Tulsa, because they were afraid the Arkansas River was going to overflow. And now people don't even know that ever happened, you know, because of the navigation system, because of what was done.
Robert S. Kerr, the king of the Senate, the man who believed Oklahoma could have a waterway to the world, died in 1963. He did not live to see a completed lock and dam. In Kerr's wake, Arkansas Senator John McClellan took the helm and continued to fight for funds needed to complete the Arkansas River Navigation Project. The federal government spent $1.2 billion for the entire system, and in December of 1970, 24 years after Congress passed the Rivers and Harbors Act, the new navigation system was complete. Young boys and their grandfathers would no longer be able to wade across the Arkansas River in search of better fishing. The Arkansas River Navigation System enters Oklahoma at Spiro. It runs up the Arkansas River through Sallisaw, Webbers Falls, and Muskogee. But at Chocho, it leaves the Arkansas for the smaller Verdigris River.
Some people will ask, they say, well, why did they come up the Verdigris River? Why is the Tulsa Port of Catoosa on the Verdigris and not on the Arkansas River? Well, the reason is that The Arkansas River at Tulsa is 110 feet higher in elevation than the verdigris here at Catoosa. So when you're building these locks and dams, and you have to overcome the elevation, you know, you're bringing cargo up the river, it was much cheaper to bring the navigation system here to Catoosa and build fewer locks and dams than it was to up the Arkansas River to Tulsa, and you get to basically the same area.
On the verdigris, the navigation system has its final lock and dam before it reaches the end of the line at Catoosa, just east of Tulsa.
Everybody wanted to take advantage of this new wonderful thing, and of course the cities that were along the navigation system had the most opportunity.
Imagine international ports and foreign trade zones in Oklahoma. Imagine barges from all over the world docking in Muskogee and Tulsa. These two Oklahoma towns hit the economic development jackpot with the Arkansas River navigational system. Leaders saw the potential and made the most of it by building ports.
When the citizens of Muskogee County invested in the port some 35 years ago, they invested $1.3 million.
Tulsa passed a bond issue in 1967, $19.5 million. And there was a lot of publicity about the river and about what things would be like.
When everybody realized that there was going to be a port built in Muskogee, Oklahoma, the expectations may have been a little bit unreal. Like all of a sudden you build a port and it's going to change everybody's lives forever.
The entire nation buzzed with the news. Landlocked Oklahoma was open to the waterways of the world. On June 5, 1971, tens of thousands of people, network news organizations, international papers, and the sitting President Richard Nixon, who'd also been pressed for funding, flocked to the port of Catoosa for the system's official dedication.
It was huge. President Nixon was there, and all kinds of state and national dignitaries. They had also brought up the navigation system, all different kinds of marine boats to have as a backdrop of photos. They were behind the podium and you could see them, and it was quite something.
Now, I remember when I visited Oklahoma in the campaign of 1968 being lobbied a bit on this project. I flew over all of this area, and I remember that on that occasion Dewey Bartlett and Senator Bellman, Bud Wilkinson, Paige Belcher talked to me about the enormous promise and of course the fact that this project was to be completed and that I must return to participate in its dedication. Well, I promised to be back on the day when the Gulf of Mexico came up to Catoosa. I'm delighted to make good on that promise. Here I am.
It's a big deal because they actually have a port here in the middle of the country, you know, and not just a port, but actually an international port. President Nixon on the tape makes a reference to Will Rogers.
But this is the first time I've had a chance to go one up on that great cowboy philosopher. One time in 1923, he was spoofing the Congress about its public works spending. And he made his point by saying that all that money being passed out, that he could probably even get himself a harbor built on the Verdigris River at Ulaga. I think that's the way you pronounce it. I practiced it on the way out on the airplane. Well, this magnificent new port is still a few miles downstream from Ulaga. But it's close enough that this time the Corps of Engineers and the people of the supposedly landlocked Sooner State can have the last laugh. For years, there were many who dismissed the idea of an Arkansas River waterway as a foolish dream. But there were others, men like Senator Bob Kerr and John McClellan, who held it as a bold and achievable vision. The completed project that we dedicate today has proved that they were right.
Congress renamed the system to honor those men who dared to dream of international ports on the prairie. From that day on, Oklahoma's waterway to the world would be known as the McClellan-Kerr Arkansas River Navigation System.
The first barge to come to the Tulsa Port of Catoosa carried newsprint for the Tulsa World. First barges that came to Muskogee carried oil field pipe.
It takes 10 days for a towboat to push its barges from New Orleans to the Port of Catoosa, making river transport a slower method of shipping. But Oklahoma businesses quickly realized that what it cost in time, the river made up for in price.
The navigation system is open to any boat. I mean, you could take a raft on it. Anyone can use the locks. The locks, passage through the locks is free, and that goes back to a 1787 government document that was issued during the administration of George Washington.
In an effort to keep Spain, France, and Great Britain from charging a tax to ship goods on the North American rivers those countries controlled, Washington proclaimed that transportation on rivers be forever free. In the early years of operation, proponents of the navigation system, such as the ports, had to educate Oklahoma businesses about the benefits of shipping by water. It costs fractions of a cent to ship 1 ton of goods 1 mile by truck, rail, or by barge, but those fractions can add up. Shipping by rail costs more than twice as much as by barge, and shipping by truck, that's 8 times as costly. 1 barge can carry 1,500 tons. That's as much as 15 rail cars or 60 trucks.
1 barge takes 60 semi-trucks off the road. 1 semi-truck is equivalent to 3,200 passenger cars. If you have to go back to transporting that kind of transportation, where we're going to see our roads continue to deteriorate worse than what they are.
Right now, Oklahoma ships approximately almost $6 million tons a year. On the entire navigation system, it's almost 13 million a year, but it did start out slowly. It's a complete different mindset to people don't know how to ship by waterway.
But they're learning. President Nixon predicted that the Oklahoma towns to have ports on the McClellan-Kerr Arkansas River navigational system would see tremendous growth. As far as Muskogee's Port Authority director is concerned, Nixon was right.
There's been over $200 million invested by private companies in the port. Muskogee has 3 miles of waterfront altogether. Some of that is at the public port, some of it is just downstream from the public port. The major employers in Muskogee are located on the river. And the investment along the waterway, just the 3-mile segment in Muskogee, is over $2 billion. There's more than 3,500 people working along the river at those industries. So for Muskogee, I would dare to say the impact has probably been equal to or greater than any 3-mile stretch of river on the entire McClellan-Kerr.
The Port of Catoosa has enjoyed the same success.
It is really an industrial hub. And I'm very proud of it as a Tulsan. I'm very, very proud of what's happened, and an Oklahoman.
"36 years after its dedication, those who know the story of Oklahoma's great waterway still feel that pride. But many Oklahomans have either forgotten the story or were never told.
Barges pass slowly in the night, and they really don't interface with the public as much as trucks or trains do. So it's not uncommon to find people who live in Muskogee that know very little about the port.
Here in Oklahoma, the ports aren't in the center of the metropolitan areas. They're out in places that people just don't frequent that often. So it's very easy not to realize what's going on.
When it was new, it was the gem of the state. People came from all over to view it, but throughout the years, people have come to take the system for granted.
Pool nose now, 110 feet, still holding 15 to your longboat.
Did your grandpa ever get to see the ships?
Yes, he did. He certainly did.
What do you think? What did he say to you then?
He was impressed. Actually, after the system was built, we did get to fish a few times together, and we actually did get to see those ships go up and down the system that he had talked about.
36 years later, you too can watch the ships, the barges that quietly move up and down Oklahoma's waterway to the world.
Northbound 15, Athena.
While the import of the navigation system may be lost on many Oklahomans, the people who spend their lives on the river say it's thriving.
I've watched this system grow. We got lots bigger vessels, towboats, that's pushing now. And we're pushing where we used to push 4, 6, 8, 10 barges, now we're pushing 15. And we're in the process of upgrading the channel to a 12-foot depth. And all that means is you're going to get more vessels, bigger vessels, that's pushing more barges.
Not only is the river itself changing, the ports in Muskogee and Catoosa are expanding too, as more and more businesses discover you can get there from here.
Old Man River, that old man river.
This Stateline History Special was made possible by the Oklahoma Centennial Commission. Celebrate Oklahoma, a unique history, an extraordinary future.
For a VHS or DVD copy of this program, please send a check or money order for $22.95 to the OETA Foundation, Post Office Box 14190, Oklahoma City 73113. Or to place a credit card order, call 800-879-6382 during regular business hours.